Joe Hargrave had been driving the same route for years, a lonely stretch of Route 78 that wound through the heart of Maine's wilderness. The isolation was part of the job, but Joe liked it that way, no distractions, just the hum of the engine and the rhythmic pulse of the road. It was a quiet, predictable existence until the night of the accident. It started with the fog. Thick, choking mist rolled in as Joe navigated the winding curves of the highway. Visibility dropped to mere feet. His headlights cut through the haze, illuminating nothing but swirling white. The radio crackled with static, and Joe's usual playlist seemed to vanish, replaced by eerie whispers and distant cries. At first he thought he was imagining it, tired eyes playing tricks on him, but then he saw them shadowy figures standing by the roadside, their forms barely discernible through the fog. He slowed down, peering through the mist. The figures seemed to flicker and shift, as if they were caught between worlds. As Joe approached one of the apparitions, a piercing scream shattered the silence. The truck's brakes squealed in protest as he skidded to a halt. Before him lay a mangled vehicle, a recent crash. The wreckage was twisted and torn, and a trail of blood led away from it, vanishing into the fog. A figure emerged from the mist, a man, his clothes tattered and stained, his face a mask of despair. He reached out with a hand that seemed both solid and insubstantial. "Help us," the man rasped. "We need to finish the trip." The words echoed in Joe's mind as he sped away, the figure disappearing into the fog. The next morning, the crash site was gone, and the fog had lifted. The authorities found no trace of the wreck or the man. Joe was left with an unsettling sense of dread, haunted by the specters of those lost on Route 78. He learned that some roads are not just pathways through the land, but into realms of the damned. The midnight delivery. Tommy Doyle had always prided himself on being punctual. His job as a long-haul trucker meant he was used to tight schedules and odd hours, but the job on this particular night was different. A cryptic phone call had come in, requesting a midnight delivery to a warehouse on the outskirts of a small town he'd never heard of. The directions were vague, but the pay was too good to refuse. As he drove into the heart of darkness, the landscape became increasingly alien. The road twisted through dense, foreboding woods, and the occasional flicker of light from distant homes gave the feeling of entering a forgotten world. The warehouse was situated in an abandoned industrial park, its windows boarded up and walls covered in grime. Tommy arrived precisely at midnight. The warehouse was ominously silent, and the only sound was the distant rustle of the wind. He knocked on the metal door, and after a moment, it creaked open. Inside, the warehouse was dark and filled with a thick, musty odor. A man in a suit and mask met him, gesturing for him to follow. Tommy wheeled in the cargo, a large crate covered in layers of protective wrapping. The man led him down a narrow corridor to a room marked with strange symbols. The walls were adorned with photographs of old, decaying buildings and cryptic notes. When the crate was opened, Tommy was horrified to see a grotesque, writhing mass inside, covered in what looked like old, decaying human remains. The masked man muttered an incantation in a language Tommy couldn't understand. The mass began to stir and pulse, sending shivers down Tommy's spine. In a panic, he fled the warehouse, the man's voice echoing after him, promising that the cargo was meant for a special kind of client. Tommy sped away, the image of the writhing mass burned into his memory. No one else had ever seen the warehouse or the man again, and Tommy's once steady hands now trembled at the thought of the dark rituals conducted in the dead of night.